I speak about this topic 3 to 4 times a week. Like Orlean, I've pretty much dedicated my life to informing people about what's happening not only in California, but all across the nation, because sustainability and sustainable development are words that we use and we don't really understand what they mean. And I started my own organization called Citizens Town Hall, and what I do is I help people put on local town halls in their own community to inform folks about what's going on. Because this isn't a left or right issue, it's about right and wrong. And our American freedoms are at stake, and choice about where we live, how we get around, those things are all being infringed upon. In fact, in Danville, where I live, I have a small community, well, relatively small compared to others, but 42,000 people are in my community of Danville. And we don't have a BART station, we don't have any type of transit other than maybe a bus that comes by every 20 minutes. And we just went through a general plan update fight. It was all about transforming my small town into high density stack and pack housing and getting us out of our cars so that we would take public transit or the train, but that we don't have any public transit. And so, you know, we started asking, well, where does this come from? Where does all of this come from, these ideas? And one of the things about our general plan update was that we had a definition that was inserted into our general plan, and it was all about sustainable development and sustainability. So I look up the word sustainable in the dictionary, and it's to uphold, to maintain, to support. And then I look at my general plan, and the definition that I saw was verbatim from a 1987 UN Brundtland Commission report where sustainable development, the term, was coined. And I wonder how in the world does an international organization's definition get into my town's general plan and become the focus and foundation for the direction that my town will take over the next 20 years? So I started asking questions and doing a lot of research, and I found an American Planning Association newsletter from 1994. And in this 1994 newsletter, it says, and mind you, this is the American Planning Association saying this. It says that within the past year, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which was created by President Clinton, has been organized to develop recommendations for incorporating sustainability into the federal government. Also, various groups have been formed to implement Agenda 21, a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable development that was adopted at the recent UNCED conference in Rio de Janeiro, the Earth Summit. It also goes on to say that there is a federal pilot program for the implementation of sustainable development, and that a company, an organization called Urban Ecology, has received grants which will enable to begin preparing the blueprint for a sustainable Bay Area. So I went on the internet and found the blueprint that they were talking about, written by Urban Ecology in 1995, and it was actually in the works before that. So we're talking about a plan that's been in place for almost 20 years now, that's now being implemented here in my town, and I didn't even know about it. And you know, this plan has been worked on by unelected, unaccountable regional bureaucracies. In the Bay Area, ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, is a regional organization, a land use planning organization, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats making decisions about how and where we're all going to live. In partnership with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is, handles our roads and highways and BART facilities. That handles how we're going to get around as far as transit. Those organizations partnered with a handful of NGOs and stakeholder groups around the Bay Area, including Urban Ecology, and signed a compact in 1997. And this compact created the Bay Area Alliance for Sustainable Communities. And they adopted the United Nations definition of sustainable development. In my general plan in Danville, the guy that wrote our plan, the consultant that my city hired, is actually from Urban Ecology. So an international organization is dictating basically local policy through unelected boards, bodies, and commissions. And what has happened is those boards, bodies, and commissions then have gotten legislation passed in California forcing us down this path. AB 32, in 2006, the Global Warming Act, AB 32, was passed, and it called for a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2020. Now, we are already there as a nation, but that doesn't seem to faze these folks. And the fact is that we have extreme standards for our CAFE standards for our cars, and we should be able to get to way below that with just the gas standards that we have now. But everything is based on global warming, the threat of sea level rising, pollution, and things like that. That is the impetus for change. And so in order to save the planet, we need to create sustainable communities. And that's the implementation of SB 375. SB 375 calls for sustainable communities all throughout California. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, well, what do these people consider sustainable? Because, you know, how do I know I'm unsustainable, and how do I know what sustainability means? And, you know, these all sound like good words. They all sound like things that we want. We want to maintain and preserve and conserve for our future generations. But when you start reading the legislation, then you realize that these aren't very good ideas. Sometimes good ideas are nice, but when you're implementing them, they turn into something else. So, in order to save the planet, we need to all give up our cars, we need to give up our lifestyles, we have to create sustainable communities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and outside of those sustainable communities, if you own land, it will be converted to open space and become part of the wildlands corridor system. So I took a look at the bill in SB 375, and I've been fighting this a long time. So I read the bill and I realized that, you know, they consider a sustainable community as a minimum of 20 units per acre. Minimum of 20 units per acre. Developers will get bonuses for higher densities, lower incomes, and this is required to be within a half-mile of transit. Well, as I said, my town didn't have transit. We barely have bus service. We're nowhere near a major transit hub. So creating high-density housing in a small town like mine would simply create more greenhouse gas emissions, more pollution, and not help the environment at all. So if you don't have a minimum 20 units per acre, your lifestyle is considered unsustainable. Your single-family residential home is considered unsustainable. Now this year, there was a bill introduced called SB 1, Senate Bill 1, and it's already passed the Assembly, it passed the Senate, and it was given to the governor and then pulled back, but it's going to come back in the next session. And Senate Bill 1 is a frightening bill because Senate Bill 1 is the funding arm for sustainable communities in California. And in order to create and redevelop our future communities in this model of a minimum of 20 units per acre, they have to take land, infill development, and things like that in order to create this type of development, high density stack and pack housing with multi-unit family building, and then below is retail space. So Senate Bill 1 allows them to not have to declare blight. They can simply deem use the legislative term for blight, which is now going to be inefficient land use patterns. So that could mean anything. It puts everyone's private property at risk in California. Because if an unelected bureaucracy can deem your property inefficient land use, they can take it for redevelopment through eminent domain. These are the Bay Area priority development areas. So the implementation of SB 375 in the pilot program called the Bay Area Sustainable Communities is actually implemented through PDAs, priority development areas. So the red areas that you see here are the areas where all future focused development will be. Anyone who doesn't have property inside of those red areas, it's going to be much harder for you to get permits and develop your property in the future. Now, in California, we have urban growth boundaries, arbitrary lines that have been drawn about our cities and counties that determine how and where we can grow. And a lot of us voted for this back, you know, in the 1990s, not really thinking ahead or understanding what we were voting for. But what happens when you shrink your urban growth boundaries is you're forcing people to live in tighter and tighter areas. Now, anyone who has private property outside of those urban growth boundaries has lost a lot of their property value because they can no longer build on those properties. They don't have the development rights to do that. Now consider the PDAs that you're seeing here as an urban growth boundary within the urban growth boundary. If you own property inside these red areas, that's where the development will occur. Developers will get waivers for CEQA and environmental waivers. They won't have to do any greenhouse gas analysis for light trucks and cars. They will get to violate ordinances for setbacks. They won't have to have as much parking. They'll get the red carpet rolled out, and you'll be much more likely to have redevelopment there. Anyone who doesn't have property inside those red areas, priority development areas, will have a much harder time doing any redevelopment. Now this is what a sustainable community looks like to the planners at the Association of Bay Area Governments and the regional bodies. They would love to see us living in a minimum of 96 units per acre with no cars. We're simply going to bike, we're going to walk, we're going to take public transit or trains wherever we go. But this is what they consider a human settlement or a sustainable community. I mean, that's what this is all about. So when people talk about being sustainable, they need to know what the legislation is saying, because everything that's not sustainable is then by definition unsustainable. So what happens if you're not living, or what happens if you implement this type of sustainability? And they would be happy to see us living in 300 square foot apartments. And in fact, in San Francisco and New York, they're already building less than 200 square foot apartments. Because, you know, in order to save the planet, their idea is that we need to live in smaller and smaller areas. So we're getting the idea, and we're given the idea because of the shrinking urban growth boundaries, because of the way that we are being packed tighter and tighter together, that there isn't enough open space. And we're being conditioned to think, well, we need more open space. Well, I checked on the U.S. Census Bureau on open space because I wanted to know, well, how much open space is there in the United States? And this is the 2000 census, and in 2000, 95% of the entire United States is undeveloped open space. That's the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, as of 2010, I think it was like 95.25 or something like that. But it's still very, I'm sorry, it was a little bit less than that. But we have a lot of open space. So when people say we don't have open space, that's a misnomer. This is a map of the United States if the Global Biodiversity Treaty would have been implemented. Now, in 1992, Dr. Michael Kaufman, he created this conceptual map. And he gave it to Congress because at the time, Congress was getting ready to vote on the Global Biodiversity Treaty that was being implemented or being proposed by the United Nations. President Clinton had already signed on to this treaty and said that the United States was going to follow this. Now, mind you, they had only had a title and summary of the document. They didn't have the 1,140 pages that would define exactly how it would be implemented. So they didn't really know what they were voting on. He showed them this map and stopped the vote. And what you're seeing right here is a conceptual map of what it would look like if we rewilded 50% of the United States. So the red areas are the core areas. Those will be completely off limits to human beings. Those areas are then connected through corridors, the smaller red areas, to create a wildlife corridor system throughout North America where the lions, bears, and whatever, large predatory animals, wolves, can roam free. The yellow areas are the buffer zones, and those would also be off limits to human beings. And you and I would be limited to living in human developments or human settlements known as sustainable communities. Now, when I look at a map like this, I see a giant takings map. As a realtor, I'm thinking, how are they going to make a map like this unless they start taking people's private property and limiting what you can do with your land? Now, Congress didn't ratify this. However, everything is being implemented anyway through executive orders, through unelected, unaccountable boards, bodies, and commissions. And as a matter of fact, California has an actual map implementing the wildlands in California. And as goes California, so goes the rest of the country. This is an actual Caltrans Department of Fish and Game map, and it's called the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project. And they use special interest groups, extreme environmental groups, to go out and map out California. And this is a real map, and all MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, all transportation authorities are required to use this map in their planning for land use and transportation, now and in the future. So here's what the map looks like. Now imagine the nationwide map that I showed you. That was the conceptual map. This is the actual map for California. You can go to the DFG website or Caltrans website. You can find this map. Their logo's at the bottom. And what you're looking at is the wildlands corridor system for California. Now they don't distinguish between public and private property. I went to the DFG in Sacramento. I went to Caltrans, and I had an interview with both of them because I saw this map and I know what I think this map is telling me, but I didn't want to make things up, so I went there and said, you know, tell me what you're using this map for. Tell me what it is. And they basically confirmed everything that I'm telling you, that this map doesn't distinguish between public and private property. The green areas are undeveloped land, open space. There's over 76% open space in California between public and private land. So those are the core areas, and the core areas are then going to be connected through corridors, and those are the yellow and red areas. Now, in order to create those connections so the wildlife can roam free across California, they're going to have to take some land in order to do that. So in California, we've had the Williamson Act, okay? And a lot of people who in our rural areas understand what I'm talking about when I say that the Williamson Act has helped, has allowed farmers and ranchers to be in control of their land, receive a reduction in taxes, and in exchange, not develop that land, but they're in control of their destiny. And it's a short-term thing, 10, 20 years, and they can renew the contract. And it was so successful that, in fact, they want to do away with the Williamson Act because the government can't control your land in perpetuity. So what they're trying to do now is they're trying to get farmers and ranchers to sign on to conservation easements. And it's in perpetuity, so you would not be able to develop your land or change your mind or get out of it forever in exchange for a one-time payment. Now, a conservation easement can be a good thing if you want that land to never be available to be developed. That's fine. It's your choice if you want to sign on to that. But you need to be aware of the fact that you may be signing over your carbon credit rights to that land and you didn't know it. You're signing over potential access to resources. You may be sued by the NGO and stakeholder that's actually going to be managing that land. And what ends up happening is an unelected group like the Sierra Club or the Greenbelt Alliance or some other entity is put between you and between the landowner and the federal government. So that group actually will control what you can do in the future with your land. So the Williamson Act was a much better way to go. But they're trying to get people to sign on to these conservation easements in order to complete this map. And if you don't sign on to these conservation easements voluntarily, then a lot of these organizations are then targeting you by going to the local jurisdictions and counties to regulate you out of the use of your land. So if you have land in any of these areas, I would be very concerned. Now that was the California statewide map, and there are many sub-programs within California that are being implemented quietly where that land is being locked up and that map is being formed. Here's one example. There's 18 million acres through the California Foothills Legacy Project. There's a group called the California Rangeland Conservation Coalition, and this group is pushing for locking up 18 million acres surrounding the entire Inland Valley. And the people who own property in these areas don't even know about it. Here's the Berryessa Snow Mountain. Now, this is a national conservation. They're trying to designate this as a national conservation area. It was originally 800,000 acres. They reduced it to 500,000 acres, and it's a conservation overlay over the top of public land, which sounds okay. Well, why should we worry? It's public land. Well, 350,000 acres of private land is surrounded by the public land that's going to be conserved. Now, public land is already technically in conservation. I mean, I don't see the federal government giving away public land, or, you know, so there's really no danger of it being developed at this point in time. But if you own any type of land within a designated conservation area, you will ultimately be subject to the same restrictions as if you were in a conservation area. Look at the government shutdown that just happened a little while ago. Do you remember seeing on TV the people that had land, that were private land within the public parks, that suddenly couldn't get to their private property? They had no rights. That is exactly the example of what it would be, what it would be like to have a conservation overlay where your property is completely surrounded by government-owned land. Now, this is open space for the Bay Area, and as I said, this is a wildlands corridor system throughout California, and they have not left any stone unturned. There are corridor systems that they're planning for the Bay Area to allow the wildlife to roam free in extremely populated areas. Now, as you may be able to see, there's over 1.2 million acres of open space just in the Bay Area alone. And again, they don't distinguish between private and public land. They simply want to take that land and develop it into corridor systems. So here's an example of how it's actually being implemented. And as I said, I went to the Department of Fish and Game. I spoke to the people that are in charge of making the map. And they said, oh, don't worry, it's just a map. You know, there's no regulation behind it. And of course, I said, you know, well, why are you making the map then? If you don't intend it to be used, why do we have this map? And why are our local land use and transportation planning departments all required to use this map? Oh, well, it's their choice. So what this person did was give me a copy of a map showing San Jose actually implementing a conservation area, and surrounded by the red areas shows you where they're going to focus, and overlaying the California Central Habitat Connectivity Map over the top of that. So what you see here is the fact that those people who have private property and own private property in the areas that are in the conservation corridors are in danger of their private property being taken. They're in danger of their private property being regulated. They're in danger, their private property is at risk and they don't even know it. And if they're wondering why they can't get a permit for development, this is why. So I'm all about giving people information about what's going on, letting them know, because you know this has been going on and it's relatively new, and they had a meeting. The Association of Bay Area Governments, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is diverting transportation dollars. This is our gas tax money. This is supposed to be going to our roads and our highways, and they're diverting that transportation money to this conservation plan, and they're pushing for all of this. And here's a meeting that we went to where they were talking about giving money to these NGOs and stakeholder groups to have them go target you out of your private property, and then we showed up.
So the funding available, we have $5 million of federal highway administration funds, and those are funds that MTC manages. So MTC, they've set aside a total of $10 million for the Bay Area. $5 million is for these 4 North Bay counties, and that's not the subject of this workshop. $5 million is for the other counties.
Now I'm really confused. It's a highway?
So these are federal highway administration funds, but they can, you know, within the transportation bill, there's a wide range of things that these dollars can go towards.
Then what was your education process for letting people know that they're in a PCA? Because I never heard it. I'm smack right in the middle of one. I never heard of it until my neighbor told me about it. So are you, because we're there, we didn't even know how we got there.
is this really the subject of this workshop?
Yes, because she's using the term
No, but it happened in
multiple
2008 with your local government.
In the PCA, don't you think she has a right to ask questions about how they're going to give a project funding for a PCA that she's involved in? I would say she's a pretty big stakeholder.
I mean, what's the definition of a
Park
stakeholder?
districts, open space, organizations, nonprofits, government agencies,
The government never gives you money without strings attached. I mean, that's just ridiculous. The federal government is broke, the state is broke, our roads suck, and you guys want to do this? I mean, that's kind of like being almost personally bankrupt and then go in and buy a boat.
This isn't the subject of this
Yeah,
workshop.
yeah.
It is.
It's
how.
No, I want to hear about the grant program because I want to write
Some
some
of us
grants.
want to hear.
Yeah, we want to actually
There's no money.
Some of us
These are
want
raw
to be
issues.
involved in your little
Can we do another
powwow
meeting?
for-
Can we do another meeting about that?
Well, not to mention, we're talking about money.
We are talking about money.
State has no money.
We want to
The legislature
understand,
did
we want to
it.
understand the process.
And that's
We want
no
to understand
excuse.
what you're doing, and we deserve a chance. Everyone, almost everyone in this room is a stakeholder, some type of government, regional agency, or whatever, seeking to benefit from what's going on. And the public is here asking questions. This is a public meeting. I would assume you should be answering questions to somebody who actually has property in a PCA that's targeted. We at least deserve that as taxpayers to know where our money is being spent.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
that's
not
what
on
I've
our
been
road.
trying to do.
Thank you.
Is respond to
I
questions.
Just
appreciate
because
your
people-
answering questions.
Just because people pass legislation, that's the law, but how you implement that legislation
no
is
law
not
for
the
this.
law. This is not required, this is not law.
Sonia had
This
a
is
question.
somebody's idea, and we're giving our opinion about it.
Okay. There's been absolutely no public input into the California Central Wildlands mapping. It's been all done behind the scenes with NGOs and stakeholder groups. You saw there, the Greenbelt Alliance, the Sierra Club, Land Trust, land banks, they are all waiting to get transportation money. This isn't even from the Department of Fish and Game. They are diverting our transportation funds illegally, and they know it, to these programs. And they were going to give these groups grant money to go out and target people who had property in the target areas to try to convince them to sign on to conservation easements voluntarily. Or if they didn't sign on to conservation easements voluntarily, they're going to then lobby your local city, county governments to regulate you out of your land anyway. And this is what we're up against. So a couple of things that I want to just bring up in closing here is that we are suing the Plan Bay Area, okay? And if you want to help donate to the fund to stop the Plan Bay Area, which would basically stop the implementation of this blueprint for a sustainable Bay Area and our stack and pack housing everywhere in our future, go to stopplanbayarea.org, stopplanbayarea.org. The other thing that I would ask you to do today is there's a clipboard that's going around, and that is to sign. I'd like you to sign in opposition to SB 1, Senate Bill 1, and that is the abuse of eminent domain, where they can simply use a legislative definition of inefficient land use patterns to take your land. There's so much more to this bill, but that is the most crazy, egregious thing, and it doesn't take a lot of explaining for people to understand. And this is basically how they've implemented redevelopment and redefined redevelopment. So what I'd like to do in the next session when it opens is be able to walk up to the governor. I'm going to take all of these to the governor and have a groundswell of opposition to SB 1. I'm doing a parallel effort of elected officials signing in opposition, citizens signing in opposition, and also I'm trying to get realtors involved because I'm a realtor, and the California Association of Realtors is actually supporting Senate Bill 1, believe it or not. And I've talked with their legislative analysts over and over again, and they basically said, well, we don't read it that way. And I said, well, it's right here in the bill. They do not have to declare blight. And so, you know, what part of supporting private property, you know, don't you understand? And so we need to let these groups know that we're not going to tolerate this. And as a realtor, I pay dues to my local association, I pay dues to my California Association and the National Association of Realtors, and I feel like I am a union worker with absolutely no representation because I don't get to say how and where they spend our money, yet they're advocating for bills that would hurt everyone's private property in California. So I wanted to connect the dots for you, let you know, and hope that you will get involved. Go to citizenstownhall.org to learn more as well. Thank you very much.